Welcome everyone to Lone Star Spirit, your one-stop shop for everything Texas. And I'm excited about today's episode. We're continuing our look at Texas hurricanes and tropical storms. And today's episode is going to be over the 1900 Great Galveston Hurricane. But before we get into that, I do want to take just a couple of moments to thank everyone for viewing the videos. Now, if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm glad you're here. If you like what you see, give it a thumbs up and possibly become a subscriber. I try to put these videos out at least one a week just to give it a chance for everybody to catch up. But I am very, very happy to do this. I love the recording aspect of it. I just don't like the editing part of it because I'm pretty bad at it. But you got to start somewhere, right? And also, before we get into the Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900, there was one area that I neglected to talk about in the first video of this series. And if you have not seen that video, I'll put a marker up at the top of the screen so you can go and check that out. But in that first video, we talked about the MDR and the early tracking and things of that nature when it came to very early hurricane information. And one area that I neglected to talk about is called the Central American Gyre. And this area is made up of the Western Caribbean, right around up to maybe just past the Yucatan Peninsula, and goes all the way through to the central portion of the Eastern Pacific Ocean. And right here, that's right there in Central America, hence the name. This area becomes very active from May, and it's May 2nd as I'm recording this, and goes all the way through November. That's their rainy season for that area. Now, typically, this area really does not produce major hurricanes, that being a Category 3, a Category 4, or a Category 5. And when it does produce any kind of tropical disturbance that gets over open water, it's every other year, and that's according to a 2017 study. And just a little bit to the far east of the Central American Gyre, it does kind of overlap what is known as the Main Development Region, or the MDR, and you can see a picture of that on the screen here as well. Another thing that I feel that we should kind of at least talk about a little bit before we get into the Great Galveston Hurricane is two significant storms that hit the Texas Gulf Coast prior to 1900. And I'm sure there's been probably hundreds of them that have hit the Texas Gulf Coast in the years prior to 1900, but two in particular, and they just happened to hit the same town. And that town is known as Indianola. And Indianola was a town on the southern side of Matagorda Bay. And the town was basically destroyed by two hurricanes over an 11-year period. The second hurricane is the one that sticks out the most and probably had the most information about, and to this day still ranks in the top 10 of deadliest hurricanes in American history. This hurricane, it reported that it killed 771 people in Indianola. Now, Matagorda Bay, if you're not familiar with Matagorda Bay, it's about maybe an hour and 15 minutes from Brazoria, which is where I call home. And I've been to Matagorda several times, been to Matagorda Bay a few times. And what I can say is topographically, it's very similar to Galveston Bay. Galveston being an island, of course, but it doesn't rise very high above sea level. And you can only imagine that if an 1875 hurricane struck a very flat area, the storm surge and everything like that is just going to be tremendous. And unfortunately, because of these two storms, Indianola never really recovered, and to this day is listed as a ghost town. And that is one place that I'm very interested in going and checking out. And we can go out there together and film this and have a good time and learn a little bit more about early Texas history. Now on to the Galveston Hurricane of 1900. Now, I do feel that it is very important that I kind of set the stage for this storm a little bit. And that is, at this time, Galveston was one of the richest cities in America. It was the main harbor, main port for goods coming into Texas, not only from other states via the Gulf of Mexico, but other countries. And Galveston was a booming town. It was growing. There were businesses everywhere. Like I said, it was one of the richest cities in America. The storm itself actually made landfall in Galveston, on Galveston Island, September 8th of 1900. It is still, to this day, the deadliest hurricane in United States history. Now, when it comes to those who lost their lives, when it comes to that toll, the conservative estimates are 6,000 people. The larger estimate is 12,000, but the number that is most agreed upon is 8,000. So depending on the source, some will say 6, some will say 12, but most people agree that minimum 8,000 people lost their lives in this 1900 storm. The storm itself was initially detected August 27th. Now, at this time in the 1900s, or early 1900s, late 1800s, we had to rely on ships to see these storms and pass information along. There were weather stations in several different parts of the country, along the Gulf Coast, along the East Coast, all over the nation. But these ones along the Gulf Coast and on the eastern seaboard, of course, part of their job was to monitor tropical storms and hurricanes. There was a bureau, there was a tracking station there in Cuba. Now, remember, if going back to the first episode here, we didn't have radar. We didn't have Air Force reconnaissance going out there in a C-130 and getting all of this information. That wasn't until we got into the 40s, 50s, and 60s that really started to take shape. As a tropical storm, the system hit Cuba on the 3rd of September. Now, here's where it gets a little bit shady. I don't know if I 100% agree with this or not, because I guess as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little bit more cynical, maybe a little bit more analytical when it comes to history. And we always have to remember that history, even if there's no war involved, history was written by the winner. But there are some reports, and I'm going to use the term historical kind of loosely here, but there are reports that the Weather Bureau in Washington, D.C., of course, that being the nation's capital, that's going to be where the big bureau is going to be at, that the bureau there in Washington, D.C. was made aware of this storm by the weather station in Cuba. However, those same reports say that information relayed from Cuba to Washington, D.C., those reports were not taken seriously. The reasoning behind that? Well, we're just 2 years in 1900. We are 2 years past the Spanish-American War. And apparently, sentiment from that war is very poor when we're talking about Cuba. That just, I do not want to get on a tirade. I'm trying to stay on track here. I'm really bad about going on tangents, so I'm going to try to stay focused here. But I have to say this. If that is true, if that is the truth, that has got to be one of the, that's disheartening. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, again, this tropical storm that would eventually become the hurricane to hit Galveston hit Cuba on September 3rd. It is also reported that prior to this hurricane making landfall, and I'm not sure how far in advance this particular claim was made, but the a climatologist by the name of Isaac Klein had gone on record to say that it was impossible for a hurricane to hit Galveston. Unfortunately, he was wrong. Very wrong. Going back to the Weather Bureau in Washington, D.C., they determined and made the forecast that this particular storm would take a northeasterly direction, go and affect the Florida Peninsula, then move out into the open waters of the Atlantic. If that had happened, we wouldn't be talking about this storm right now. So they did a very bad job. And again, we have to remember that radar did not exist. We did not have Air Force reconnaissance planes going out there. We didn't have anything like that. We didn't even have buoys out there that recorded any kind of weather information at this time. Isaac Klein, along with his brother, who were both climatologists there in Galveston, were doing their best to warn the residents of Galveston to get out, find shelter, get to higher ground, do what you've got to do to save yourself. Now, it is also reported that the last known wind speed detection or recording was done by Joseph Klein. He had a wind meter up there, and I'm not even going to try to say the word, but and everybody probably knows what it is. But this device broke when winds from the storm reached 100 miles an hour. So you can already tell this is going to be a very bad storm. The storm surge itself was just absolutely horrific. It is estimated that the storm surge was between 13 to 18 feet. Now remember, this is Galveston Island. It is flat. So 18 foot of storm surge is probably going to engulf the entire island under at least a foot or two of water, probably more. And I can almost guarantee it was probably close to 4 to 5 feet of water in places along Galveston Island. It is estimated that really 2,100 people were actually evacuated. They left. Where they went, nobody knows, but they were able to get off the island before the storm hit. After the storm had passed, Galveston, unfortunately, was in complete ruins. Many of the investors that had put money into Galveston as a port city, or investors that were looking at Galveston to invest their money as a port city. After this storm, they took their money and ran to Houston. And that's probably the biggest reason that we have the Houston Ship Channel now, and how big and grand and successful as it is because of this 1900 storm. Needless to say, Galveston at this point had lost pretty much all of its wealth and the prosperity that it had seen in the previous years. There is one letter, or I'm going to read an excerpt from a letter, and it can be found in this book called Texas Disasters. And this is a very good book, and it's not just weather-related disasters. It's just disasters, and a lot of these are just, they're heartbreaking, they're informational. I read the one over the Wichita Falls hurricane, tornado. This is just a great book, and if you could get your hands on this book, I highly recommend that you do, especially if you're into this type of history. But there was a letter written by Mr. Thomas McGowan, and I believe he was a lawyer there in Galveston, and he wrote a letter to his brother named George, who lived in Fort Worth. And this is just a little bit of an excerpt from that letter. He wrote here, and I quote, "I can't go to sleep while it is blowing like this. There is right now, which was 9 p.m., about 4 feet of water all over the island, and it is still coming up. I am at my office, and when I tell you that the water is over my head down on the sidewalks, not the street, just the sidewalks, I am not exaggerating one bit. For I just went down the steps until I was up to my neck in water, and I could not get to the sidewalk. To try to tell you anything of the storm or scene this afternoon is just impossible." So needless to say, this hurricane was just, there's really no words to describe it. You can find horrific, I don't even know the words that would truly give this storm and the effect it had on Galveston any due credence or do any justice to it. This storm is listed as a Category 4 storm, which, interestingly enough, is the same category that Hurricane Harvey was when it hit the Texas Gulf Coast. Now, I could go on for probably 2 or 3 more hours talking about the things that were found, things that happened, businesses that were destroyed, the future effect on Galveston. And I'm sure you don't want to watch me for the next 2 to 3 hours just talking about one storm. So what I did was I just went and found some very interesting side notes or facts that you might enjoy and find interesting, as much as I did, at least. So the one that just completely floored me, there was no way that I would ever connect these two dots. But the Galveston Hurricane, just saying it today, even though I've been reading it for the past couple of weeks now, this storm is also listed in the top 10 deadliest hurricanes to hit Canada. Yeah, you heard me right. Canada. An estimated total of 232 people lost their lives in Canada from this storm. Wow. Now, another little tidbit that I found interesting is that typically when we have hurricanes hit anywhere, they go on land, and for the most part, unlike a Harvey, they dissipate rather quickly because they lose that ability to gain strength from a warm ocean. This storm, as it passed through the rest of Texas, up into Oklahoma, into Kansas, started to really weaken and got down to maybe winds of 30 knots per hour, really started to dissipate. But once it started going through Iowa, it actually strengthened back up and got to the point where it was almost hurricane force winds. We're talking 70 miles an hour in Iowa. The storm affected 11 additional states, including New York, where there are pictures of the Galveston storm causing damage in Buffalo, New York. The storm affected, like I said, 11 states in America and 5 provinces in Canada. Mind-blowing. Just, it's crazy. The storm itself finally dissipated southwest of Iceland in the North Atlantic. And the last little tidbit here, and it's something that I unfortunately really didn't know existed, but we're going to go there. And there on Seawall Boulevard, 4800 Seawall Boulevard, there is a memorial commemorating the 1900 Great Galveston Hurricane. And we will be going there at some point. Now, before we start to wrap this up, I do feel it is important that we talk about the National Hurricane Center. And they do an amazing job of tracking hurricanes, educating the public, keeping the public informed on these hurricanes, where they need to go to be safe. And you can go to their website and actually look at historical hurricanes. Now, again, keep in mind that prior to, I'm going to call it the 1960s, it was very hard to get to make sure that the tracking of these hurricanes is actually accurate. But it's still very interesting that you can go to this website and look at the paths of these hurricanes, and they're going to be able to give you wind speeds and barometric pressure, things of that nature. It's very, very, very cool. And I recommend, if you are a weather nut like I am, definitely go check the National Hurricane Center's website out and look at these historic storms. And that's going to wrap it up pretty much for the hurricane of 1900. Before I go, I do feel it is my duty as a Texan, as a fellow human being. Thoughts and prayers are with everyone who has been affected by these storms that have gone through a major swath of America over the past few days. We've had reports of one day having 80 tornadoes or more, violent tornadoes, F4s, F5s. I've always been one who believed that tornadoes were 1,000 times more dangerous than a hurricane, because you can see a hurricane coming. You can have a week to get your stuff together, get what you need, and get out of town, get to somewhere safe. The tornado, you may have 5 minutes, 15 if you're lucky. It's amazing the weather patterns that we have had already this spring. It's been a very turbulent spring for severe weather already. And the tropics, we're less than a month away from hurricane season starting, and the tropics have already started to wake up. There have been a couple of systems that have come off of the African coast. Really didn't turn into anything, but it is a reminder that this can happen very quickly. These hurricanes can spin up very quickly, become very, very dangerous in a short amount of time. So I humbly ask that everyone, especially those in a coastal area, whether it be the Gulf of Mexico, whether it be the Atlantic Ocean, even if it's in the Pacific, if you're on the West Coast, keep your eyes open for tropical type weathers. It has been reported by many hurricane experts, many meteorologists. The Texas Farmers Almanac has said that this is going to be an excessively wet summer, and that there is a distinct possibility that we will go through the entire English alphabet naming storms and then have to go into the Greek alphabet. So please, everyone, stay vigilant when it comes to severe weather, not just hurricanes, but all severe weather. Take the warnings seriously. Don't disregard them. Get you a NOAA weather radio, one that runs off of solar and you can hand crank it, one that you can hook up to a USB and keep ready to get the latest information when it comes to severe weather. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for taking time to check out this video. Make sure you go and check out the other videos that I have, both on Rumble and YouTube. If you like what you see, please give those videos a thumbs up and consider becoming a member or a subscriber, follower, whichever nomenclature they've got for each one of the streaming or the video platforms. So again, thank you everyone, and we will be back next week to talk about a hurricane that I didn't even know existed that hit my birthplace of Freeport, more specifically Velasco. But we're going to be talking about that mid-1900 hurricane that hit Freeport, Texas. Until next week, I'm Charles. This is Lone Star Spirit. Thanks again for watching. Everyone, be safe and have a great weekend.